Okay, so welcome to the When Queensland webinar. So I'm Professor Louisa Coglan and also the chair of When Queensland. I'm here today to chair the session on Lights, Camera, Pandemic, the Australian film industry featuring COVID-19. Now, just a little background to the session. COVID-19 has been a kind of story of bad news for the last 18 months. But the Australian film industry has been an unexpected success of the pandemic in Australia. As the film production ground to a halt around the globe, the Australian film industry stepped up, stepped in, and has prospered. In order to explore the response of the Australian film industry to the global pandemic and how it will fare going forward, we are very honoured today to have the company of three exceptional women who will speak to the industry's success from their own perspective. I'm very pleased to welcome to our webinar Kylie Pascoe, who is an Australian film producer of some repute, with over 30 films to her name, including Samson and Delilah and the blockbuster Paranormal Activity. And during the global pandemic, releasing Swimming for Gold and also This Little Love of Mine, just two of the many productions that she's been involved in. I'm also pleased to welcome Kylie Munnich, who is the CEO of Screen Queensland with 25 years experience in the film and TV distribution and financing. And finally, we have our resident economist for this session, Elizabeth Alvaro, who's Associate Director in Deloitte Access Economics, whose work spans a number of industries, but she does have a special interest in the economics of the film industry. Now, I don't want to steal time from our speakers, but just to give you order of ceremony, each of our speakers is going to speak for approximately 10-15 minutes. Kylie Pascoe has a little surprise for you, which rests on my technical abilities. So that will either be a success or a failure, but I will take responsibility for that right now. Once each of the speakers has given their presentations, we will open questions to the panel and I will chair that session. Please feel free to populate the question and answer box at any point during the presentations. Don't feel that you have to hold off, and I will keep an eye on the Q&A box and ensure that those questions get answered. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first presenter, Kylie Pascoe.
Thanks, Louisa, and lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me along to talk about this. I wanted to, I'm just going to screen share. Sorry, I should have done that a minute ago. Let me just do that now. So I've been invited along today to speak about the experience of making the first feature film in Australia to go into production during the global pandemic. And the film that I want to specifically speak to is a lovely little rom-com. And my thing's not working again, so bear with me for just 1 second while I get back to that page. Here it is. A lovely little rom-com called This Little Love of Mine. Now, This Little Love of Mine is a film that I co-produced with a Brisbane production company called the Steve Jaggi Company, or SJC as we call it. It was filmed in Palm Cove in far north Queensland, for people that know far north Queensland and that area near Cairns there. And it was the first Australian film to start production during the global pandemic. The film had a world premiere at the Gold Coast Film Festival in April. It then released on about 60 screens, I guess, nationally on Event and Village cinemas. And then the most exciting part about this film is that it dropped globally on Netflix on July 7. that was a Wednesday. By Saturday morning, it was the second most watched Netflix film in the world. So that was very, very exciting. And so this is where we throw back to Louisa to hopefully play the trailer.
Morning, Laura.
Morning, Frank. Oh, I heard you saved the Peterson account. I hope so.
Laura, you're always so modest. What do you know about Graham Finley?
I told you that I grew up in Sapphire Cove. His grandson, Chip, was my best friend. We lost touch, though.
That explains why there's a billionaire in my office.
Laura Price. My goodness.
Apparently, Graham's been trying to get Chip to be the CEO of his billion-dollar business for years.
It's not a good time right now.
You will get the whole Finley account. This is the big leagues now, honey.
Fly over, find Chip, get the contract signed.
Ask for Chip.
You'll be back in a few days.
Jim, you came back?
Laura Price?
Surprise!
Look at you, Miss Big City Lawyer. Do you love it?
Yeah, I do. What about you?
My charity work keeps me here.
You're a good man.
I cannot be a corporate big shot.
It's a life-changing opportunity.
Exactly.
I think you'll find the new Chip and the old Chip have a lot in common.
You've been here less than 24 hours and all you've done is send emails. I'll read that contract the minute you remember how to have fun.
Is that a deal?
I will read one page for every fun thing that you do. I read, you relax. That's the deal.
You're going above and beyond to keep a certain someone interested.
Oh, reel it in, let's go.
I've missed the silence.
I missed you.
Laura.
Owen?
Laura, I want you to marry me. Here. Now.
Wow. Do you want to talk about what just happened?
She's alive.
Sorry, I've been distracted.
Work isn't everything. Do what feels right. Here.
You must really think anything is possible.
Life can change. Just like that. Kind of feel like I'm home again.
So I'll just share my screen again. And flip back to there and hope this works. Yes, it does. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to talk to you, I guess, today about was, how we managed to get this film made during the global pandemic and what that meant for our industry as a whole and also for the other industries that helped us to get there. So I've broken it down to make it a little bit easier to a number of events that happened over a 7-month period. It normally doesn't take us 7 months to get a film like this into production, but it was a global pandemic, so that happened. So starting with January, we were all a bit tired. We'd shot our first rom-com called Romance on the Menu in Brisbane, and that was going into post-production in January. Excuse me. So we needed to start thinking about our next project and what that would be. We had another rom-com, This Little Love of Mine, that had been greenlit. So that meant it was fully financed. It was ready to go. So we just needed to start thinking about how we were going to put that plan into action. But then, of course, COVID hit. And we all know what happened next. Our original plan was to actually shoot This Little Love of Mine around Brisbane, but we couldn't find the right feel. And you saw from the trailer, we needed a tropical island to really make it look incredible. Plus, I was also a little bit nervous that Brisbane, like a lot of the other cities at that time, COVID was really impacting them. And I wasn't sure that it was really the safest place to start. And then I stumbled across this lovely document, the Far North Queensland Screen Production Strategic Plan. So this was a strategy document. We all love a strategy document, I have to say. So this had been released by the Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk in October the year before, so 2019. And basically what this plan was to do was, it was a 3-year commitment to build capacity for the Far North Queensland film industry. There were a lot of great crew up there, and of course the locations are second to none. But it's bloody expensive to shoot in a regional location, especially somewhere as far north Queensland. So nobody had really had really moved on that. And it just gave me an idea, I guess, that this is maybe something we could marry this little love of mine alongside this strategic plan, and it would all work out nicely. So I went to the team and I had sort of 3 compelling reasons, I think, why we should do this. And, firstly, we would find beautiful locations that would really, I think, elevate the film and make it pop and really, give us that tropical island feel. Secondly, I knew that Far North Queensland had been hit really badly by the pandemic. Tourism had come to an absolute halt, I guess. It was tumbleweeds, sadly, up in those areas. So I thought, here's a chance for us to actually go up and do some good, generate some jobs, pop in some dollars. And also, I will admit that I also did think we would probably get a really good deal at a resort up there, and we'd be able to shoot down beaches that weren't covered in tourists. So they were the 2 of the reasons. Thirdly, Kylie, for you, I thought it might look good, and we might win some brownie points with our good friends at Screen Queensland, and also with Department of Premier and Cabinet, because I know everybody really was looking for some good news stories out of Far North Queensland, and I was really keen to put my hand up and be one of those good news stories of that. Then we rolled into February. We had all agreed that this was, we thought we'd at least investigate this option. February rolled around and we had in our minds planned to sort of start shooting the film in early April. So we needed to go into pre-production in March. So in February, the film's director, Christine Luby, and I jumped on a plane and flew to Cairns, and that was on the 27th of February, I think. And we met up with a local locations manager there, and we went location scouting, and you can see from that picture, that was at Ellis Beach. That was just one of the incredible locations that we came to. So we were both pretty excited. We also met with community and some local government there, and we just immediately knew that we had local support as much as we did have Screen Queensland support to go up there. So Christine and I flew back to Brisbane, both very excited, and then I flew to my home in regional Victoria and my office and started basically devising a plan to take our whole production to Far North Queensland. But then March hit, and with it came the news, of course, that Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson had tested positive on the set of the Baz Luhrmann film Elvis, and that shut the production down, and there was a huge amount of uncertainty about when it would start again. And in fact, there was so much uncertainty that productions all around the country just stopped. Everything came to a halt, and nobody really knew how to manage our industry, I guess. I really struggled because we were trying to get this film up, and I would look at Queensland, for example, and there were essential businesses and there were non-essential businesses, and there were rules for each, and those industries could follow the guidelines, depending on which category they'd been allocated. But we were nowhere. Film just didn't fit in either of those categories, and it was really difficult. We were like a round peg, I guess, trying to fit in a square hole. And without a plan, without like a COVID safe plan, we just weren't allowed to operate. Sorry, phone. So as an industry, I think we really struggled. It was as simple as that. So it was probably late March, I guess, when we just went, you know what, we're just going to bite the bullet. We're going to put our wishful thinking hats on. We're going to put everything in place on the off chance that we can get the go ahead. And this included creating a COVID safe bubble at where we actually found the Alamander Resort in Palm Cove, just outside of Cairns. If anybody knows sort of that resort, it's incredible. All the border closures had devastating effect in that area, and I was able to strike a pretty nice deal with the Alamander Resort, which pretty much was empty except for the 2 residents that were living there, and that was it. That was our production bubble that we were all like, woo, let's go stay there for 6 weeks. So we just had to then get the okay to start production. Everything else was in line, basically. So I'll just leave this slide up here because it's quite beautiful for a little bit longer so you can all dream. But for the next few months, I guess we were caught in the love triangle of Queensland Health, Department of Premier and Cabinet, and Screen Queensland. And each department really wanted us, they were really rooting for us to be able to get this production up and running, but nobody really knew how to make it happen because there was so much uncertainty. Nobody wanted to give us the okay in case something happened and you know, we had to get shut down as well, and nobody wanted to be responsible to be put in that position where they're putting people's health at risk, I should say. And the rules kept changing because the virus kept changing and nobody really knew when it was going to end. So, you know, my days for that 3-month period consisted mainly of phone calls between Screen Queensland, and who were amazing again, Queensland MPs, local councils, whoever would listen, basically. At that stage as well, our state, or our national screen agency, Screen Australia, had been working to develop a COVID safe plan for our industry. But we were in a situation where we just we couldn't wait for that. So we kind of created our own. And it was a bit of a hybrid mashup between, I guess, a couple of Australian work safe plans and a specific film industry plan from the UK and a specific film plan from New Zealand. And I was pretty excited. I mean, you can see how beautiful it looks there on that screen, just how glamorous that page one of 27 pages. But it was pretty exciting that we were able to develop the first COVID plan in the country. So it was late June. We had a COVID safe plan. We had a production bubble, and we stopped getting no's from Queensland Health. So we packed up our 45 cast and crew from Brisbane, and we flew them to Far North Queensland, where we were joined by about another 20, I guess, local cast and crew to become the first film to go into production during that pandemic. But it wasn't all clear sailing, and there were, you know, lots of COVID tests, but the Far North Queensland community really embraced us during that time. Let me just quickly go to the next one. Money was really scarce, and so people were helping in any way that they could. And like the Cairns City Council, for example, they waived all the garbage collection fees from the resort, and they doubled the collection, the number of the garbage collection, because they knew we were there. They helped us with our film permits, and they introduced us to people when we needed to get boats, and like they were just really, really fantastic. And even the local fever clinic, you know, they would, if they knew we had people flying in late after hours, they would stay open. If they knew we had extras that needed to be on set on Monday, they would open on Saturday, so that they could COVID test those extras so that they were clear and ready for production on Monday. So there were lots of little things that that they were able to do. The Alamander opened the day spa for us in our first weekend there. And, you know, it was fantastic. And everybody was really excited because people were working again, and it was something that just nobody had been doing in that area. And even people that were cleaning our rooms, you know, they were back at work, and they were really excited by all of that. And this is us starting. So this is Christine Luby, our director, just on set with 2 of our cast there. I guess one of the things that, you know, the aftermath of this production, there are a couple of points that really, I mean, we got to number 2, as I said, in the world, but there were some other things that really meant a lot more, I think, to us as a company, and, you know, to me specifically anyway. Like I'll just share a couple of those with you now. So the day that I called Mandy Ford from the Alamander Resort, which I think was on March 25, she almost didn't pick up the phone, because every call that she was receiving was a cancellation and therefore a refund that needed to be made, and or the people that own the apartments that couldn't pay their rates anymore. So, but the resort needed to, it still had expenses, and there was no money coming in, you know. So it was really, she was in a really dark place, I guess, you know, as she'd said to me. So luckily she did pick up that phone, and then, you know, by us getting there, and I think we probably put a couple of $100,000 into that resort over that short period of time, it just kept them afloat. And the same applies to the restaurant that catered for us. They were all closed. All the staff had been put off. Nobody was working. So we were able to, you know, they reopened for us, and they did little things like just opening the bar when we finished early. And it meant that our crew could have a drink again and share and talk to people. And that hadn't been happening for the, you know, the previous few months. So from a mental health perspective, it was actually really fantastic for that community in Far North Queensland, but also for our own film community as well. And the other things that were, one of the other things we put Australia back on the map. Like we we showcased Australia as an aspirational tourism destination and as a safe place to film. And I would like to think, hopefully, that we know that the international optics were on us, Australia as a production country, during the time we were shooting this film. And I hope that we played a bit of a part in some of the other international productions that we've seen over the last 12 months. But just, following on from this and going, sorry, there's another lovely photo, but following on from this, we had another resort up the road that had heard about what we were doing and came down. And coincidentally, we also then were contacted by a Canadian company who had a film ready to go and they couldn't shoot. So they said, can you shoot the film? So we said, let's give it a whirl. And up we went up to a little bit further up the road to Tala Beach Nature Resort, which is, an incredible 100-acre eco village. And we shot a thriller there called Kidnapped. Also, around about that time, the rules had been relaxed, I guess, in Queensland. So we also then shot a holiday rom-com called Sit Stay Love. It was supposed to be shot in Victoria, but Victoria went into lockdown, so we moved it back to the Gold Coast, and we made Movie World, a very snowy paradise, and filmed this lovely rom-com there. And then a couple of months later, we went back to Port Douglas, and we shot a Netflix original series called Dive Club. So I guess in the past 12 months, and I'm sorry, I know I've gone over a little bit, these projects that have been born out of the unfortunate global pandemic, but they've been able to, we've been able to create hundreds of jobs across these 4 projects. And combined, I think it was $15 million that we generated or we put back into the Queensland economy across these productions. So, we did all this in the middle of a global pandemic. So it was a pretty big year, and we are all a little bit tired, but wouldn't have it any other way. But I will just finish by saying we couldn't have done any of this without sort of the help of Screen Queensland. And I know, Kylie, you're there, and I'm not just saying that because you are here, but it was, having a screen agency that supports these productions and the filmmakers that make them really made all the difference. And without their support, these films, these jobs, and the money that we spent in the state during that time would never have been created. So that's me.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Kylie. So you tick so many economic boxes there in terms of positive externalities and revenue generation for local communities in terms of economic value, jobs. One standout, though, was how important agile local government was in terms of supporting you guys as well. Anyway, not wanting to take up too much time, we move to our second speaker, Kylie Munnich, who's the CEO of Screen Queensland. So over to you, Kylie.
Thanks, Louisa, and thank you, Kylie, as well. I think what was really well highlighted, not only the beautiful palm trees and the locations, but Kylie made a really good point about the tourism, the injection of money into local communities, the job creation. All of that is partly and more expansively what Screen Queensland is required to do. We are an economic stimulus agency. We serve the creative communities in film, television, and games development. And it's our job to support a project, whether it's a first-time screenwriter with development money, right up to the multi-million-dollar films that come into the state and film. And we have programs and we have incentives for everything from that, from the scale of that first-time person right up to those big films. It is no secret that Queensland and Australia has actually been really lucky in terms of our screen industry, particularly in the last 14 months. Definitely, there was a shutdown in March, April, May, June last year. But as Kylie said, they were definitely one of the first films, I think, in the world to get going again. And they even beat the Elvis Presley film getting back into production. Queensland was the beneficiary because we were a COVID-safe environment and a COVID-safe state. And Screen Queensland really took the opportunity to promote that both locally, nationally, and internationally. We started talking about ourselves as a production paradise, and it was true, not just because of the locations, but we have so many ways that we sell the state in terms of attracting production here. that's based on those locations, a real diversity of locations, because we can replicate almost anything in the state, I like to say, except snowy Vermont. But really, when you think about it, from beach to bush to urban environments, you know, to tablelands, reef to rainforests, there's so much that we can offer and so much that our state can stand in for. You might know that there's a very big production coming into the state very soon. It's called Ticket to Paradise, and it stars George Clooney and Julia Roberts. We're very excited about that. Not only will that project inject tens of millions of dollars into our economy and create hundreds of jobs, we are standing in for Bali in that film. So that film is set in Bali, but we're able to replicate those locations. So Screen Queensland has a locations team that helps projects and helps producers like Steve Jaggi Company and Kylie look for locations and helps international. That's all part of how we attract productions into the state. Those tourism outcomes, we work very closely with TEQ, Tourism Events Queensland, because these films absolutely give an opportunity for Queensland to shine on screen, even if we are standing in for another location. Another example is the big feature film directed by Ron Howard, 13 Lives, that came to the state this year. Well, we know absolutely that that film could have gone elsewhere in the world, but Queensland was a safe place to bring that film. It's the story of the rescue of the Thai boys soccer team, the Cave Rescue. I mean, the story in the film is set in Thailand, but again, in and around the Gold Coast, they were able to replicate locations. They did a lot of interiors, but exteriors as well. And that was a film where all of those things stacked up: the locations, the incentives, a highly skilled crew, which is justifiably world famous, and the fact that we can hopefully move quickly and agilely as an agency to support those projects. Screen Queensland has a board and they normally meet 6 times a year. As Kylie knows, we put them through their paces, and I think we brought them together 10 or 11 times last year, simply to respond to the overwhelming demand to film in Queensland. We hate losing a project. We hate losing something interstate, particularly. We compete very strongly with all of our sister agencies at the other states and territories, and also work quite closely with them in Screen Australia. So Australia's had this really shining moment, and at Screen Queensland and the other agencies, we've taken that and we've really maximised it. Not long ago, we announced a huge coup for Queensland, the Disney Plus project, Nautilus, which is a Disney original series based on the Jules Verne book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, is coming to our state later this year to start production early next year. They're going to leave behind at least $100 million in Queensland. And as Kylie would attest to, that's not just salaries for crew and cast. If you think about the multiplier effect, but also all of the industries that are involved in that. And there's such a diversity of people who work behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera, whether it's carpenters and tradies who build the sets, hairdressers and makeup artists, the money that they might spend on lumber, or the money that they might spend on petrol for the trucks and the vans that they're using. The accommodation that they're paying for, and the Alamanda Resort, as Kylie said, would have just been so thrilled to have that money coming in. So we know the benefits this brings to the state. We can demonstrate it. For the incentives that we put in, we look for a much higher rate of return. And as I said, a project like Nautilus is expected to spend $100 million in the state and create more than 240 jobs. And they will be here for a very long time. So those people come and spend time in the community, and then the small number of international people who've arrived to work on these projects have spoken so glowingly about the state, about the crews. I had the amazing opportunity to meet Ron Howard, who said that these are some of the best crews in the world that he's ever worked with. And other producers, such as the producer on Escape from Spiderhead, which was a Netflix original film that shot here late last year, early this year, where the producer said they'd never worked here before, but they were absolutely coming back. And those Hollywood people, those UK people, those international people will go back and talk about us. The secret that Steve Jaggi and Kylie Pascoe know, you know, we do need that to be out there, because the creative industries are quite volatile, and people who are crew go from job to job to job. We really need to create a sustainable industry. We need to hold on to this momentum and not let this golden opportunity go. Now, we've clearly still got some issues in Australia around states that are in lockdown, around border closures, around national border closures. So we're working really hard, both at our agency and at others and with Ozfilm, to give productions confidence to be able to film here, to come to Australia, or for local people to be able to produce here and create the right circumstances for this real momentum to keep going. It would be incredibly disappointing if, after what has been an incredibly stressful 20 months for everyone, the upside being that we got all of this production, it would be so disappointing if we didn't maintain that momentum. And Queensland had its best ever year in production in the 2020-2021 financial year. Close to $500 million worth of production was secured for our state. Best ever year, 5,500 jobs created. Now that goes over a longer period of time, but secured in that 12 months, a record for us. And an even better statistic that we're very proud of. As you would know, there are federal incentives, or you possibly know, Kylie would know about securing federal incentives, but there's a federal location incentive that the federal government offers to attract international productions into Australia. And then each state or territory works to enhance those and then attract that production to the state. So in the 2020-21 financial year, there were 13 international productions secured to Australia via the federal incentives program. And of that, 8 of them came to Queensland. That's an incredible statistic for us, because we're not the biggest state when it comes to production. Victoria and New South Wales really outweigh us because they have so much of the local production. If you think about all of the panel shows, the news shows, the local dramas, the soaps, etc., which are filmed in Victoria or filmed in New South Wales. So Queensland, I like to say that we're quite scrappy. We're really fighting to get those productions to us. So to have that vote of confidence and have 8 of those 13 projects land in Queensland, well, yeah, that's something we're very proud of. And that's why we will work to continue to secure those projects. You know, like I said, it's also about local productions, and it's also very much about skills. You might hear some people talk about skills shortages now, and Kylie would know just how much of a scrabble there is on to secure skilled crew. One of the things we do as an agency when we incentivize a project, particularly under our production attraction strategy, is to secure attachments to the project. So we take between 4 to 8 people who are in their early stages of their career, and that production must agree to take them on for a minimum of 6 weeks at award wage and give those people training on the job, hands-on training in the skills areas which we work together to identify. Interestingly, now there's a real shortage in Australia in production accountants. And so on a recent project, 13 Lives, we actually had an accountant who went and worked with the production accounting team via one of those attachments. So in fact, in the last year, we offered 96 attachment opportunities as part of some of the deliverables that we expect as a state to see from those outcomes. When we're investing in a project, when we're incentivizing a project, we want to see the money they're investing into the state. We want to see the job opportunities they're creating. We want to see the upskilling opportunities they're creating. We hope that there will be tourism opportunities. There's usually some great community outcomes as well. COVID has really made sets more of a closed experience than they might have been in the past. Kylie spoke about constant COVID testing. The COVID safe plan that evolved out of all of that industry consultation is massive. I think it's like a 45-page document. But I would also say in Queensland, we have not lost a single day to COVID shutdown since production recommenced last year. I'm touching every bit of wood I can find, because that in itself is an amazing statistic. We clearly want to keep people safe on set. We want the productions to keep rolling. Television and film is a very expensive business, and lost days and lost time are critical to the budget. So that COVID safe plan now underpins every production that we incentivize, and is a real driver to ensuring that safety and that momentum that I talked about. So look, I have a long list of productions that have come to the state. I said to you that it was just shy of 500 million. In total, it was 41 productions, and that's local, national, and international. And those statistics for us are incredible. We intend to maximise it. We're always talking about Queensland and what a great place it is to film. And as a state agency, it's our job to respond to producers. It's our job to work with creatives. It's our job to help people to continue in this industry. I've worked, as you said, for more than 25 years in this industry. So I think it's a brilliant place and a brilliant industry to work in. I encourage people who are from any different walk of life that you might be able to find a really fulfilling career in the creative industries. So, you know, I'm so proud of what we've done at Screen Queensland and the screen sector in our state in the last year, despite really difficult odds. So I think that's it for me. Thank you, Louisa.
Wow, thank you, Kylie. When we named this session and wrote the blurb, and we said it was an unexpected success of the pandemic, like those numbers that you've given have just like are mind blowing. So it really, I kind of feel like we undersold it now. So.
Well, look, some of it is definitely serendipity or even maybe schadenfreude. But what we did at Screen Queensland is we threw everything we had at it. And I've got a very exhausted team because we've worked so hard to keep that going. It is unexpected, but we saw what was coming and we absolutely made the most of it.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. The other standout from your presentation in my notes is George Clooney is coming to Queensland.
And Julia Roberts. Yeah, look, we've had some amazing...
No, she's not in my notes. George, it definitely says just George Clooney. Anyway, I shall pass on to Elizabeth, who shall round up the presentations for us. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And I feel like together both Kylie's have covered off some of my economics content, but that's all good. I will proceed. Hopefully you can all see my screen. And thank you for having me. I'm actually based in Adelaide, so thank you for having me at your Queensland event. But I'm an associate director at Deloitte Access Economics, and one of the areas that I've specialised in over the course of my career here has been the creative industries, and in particular the screen sector. So in my role, I've worked with screen agencies, central governments and broadcasters, considering the economics of the industry as well as its policy implications as well. And I think it's good to stop and think about that, because it probably would surprise some of the economists and maybe non-economists in the audience. There are plenty of us who specialise in the creative industries. That's in academia. So Louisa would know a lot of her colleagues. A lot of that expertise is at QUT, in the private sector and in government. And I think that's because these days we're talking more about creative economies, about the role of creativity in innovation and economic growth. So it really is at the forefront of our minds as policymakers and as researchers. So today I will talk through some of the economic and broader social benefits of the screen industry, and I'll, depending on time, finish off with a quick overview of some of the opportunities and challenges that I see in Australia from an economic perspective. So, change slides, that worked good. So the screen industry has a big economic contribution across Australia, big being a very technical term. Our latest estimates put the Australian screen industry at around $4.5 billion and employing nearly 40,000 workers in full-time equivalent terms. So it's significant. I only have older estimates for Queensland, so Kylie shared some of that, that currently secured production. But back in FY17, Queensland screen industry contributed around 981 million to the Queensland economy and contributed over 7,000 full-time equivalent positions to the screen across the screen sector. That's a slightly different measure. But to put that into context, Queensland screen industry accounts for around 0.32% of its overall economy, which might sound small, but in Canada, that figure is 0.22%. South Korea is 0.44%, and UK is a little bit higher. So Queensland is really among some of the best in the world. And it's important to note, I think, as well, that screen industries don't tend to dominate economies, but their impact does tend to be quite spread geographically and across other industries as well. So they're the leading figures, I guess you would say. How do we get there? As Kylie said, screen production isn't cheap. It generally involves a heap of people, a lot of equipment, and always a whole load of food. And it's this spending that stimulates economic activity. Now, film financing is super complicated. I'm sure I'll embarrass myself if I even tried to explain it in detail with both Kylies on the line. But I like to think of it as a whole bunch of parties contributing to a big bucket of money. And those parties can be all sorts. You can have like a big international player like a Netflix, BBC. You might have a local broadcast or a free-to-air network. Might be a local subscription service like Stan. You most likely have some funding from a state or federal government. And on top of all of that, you probably have some private funding, maybe from pre-sales or the producers. So yeah, super complicated. But anyway, you have all that money. And it goes into this bucket and then it's spent on heaps of things. And we heard some of those things. It's really, really diverse. And look, most of it is like a lot of it's people. Screen production is what economists would call a relatively labor intensive industry, but a lot of it is spent on stuff and services. So, your accommodation, your catering, your props, your rent, there's so many different things and so many industries that the screen sector indirectly supports. And all of those industries have their own supply chains as well. So you can kind of think of it as really flowing down the chain. Now, what influences the economic contribution is where the stuff is sourced from. And I think this is, the Far North Queensland example is a really good one, because when you're talking about regional production, especially when you're in areas that wouldn't otherwise be a screen hub, a large production can be really transformational. And especially if you're sourcing as many of your inputs, or what we call as factors of production in economics, if you're sourcing them from that local area, you're directly stimulating those businesses. And on top of that, you likely have your cast and crew who are staying there and spending some of their income as well in that local area. So yeah, it is really that classic multiplier effect. And I think that's one of the really important aspects of this industry, is that it's not all centred in Sydney and Melbourne or even on the Gold Coast. It is quite spread across states and territories, and within those, you have some productions that are more CBD centric, but you have others that are out on location. They're in rural and remote areas. They're in small towns, big cities, everything in between. And within one production, it's not all going to be in one place. Again, speaking, I have never made a film for the record, but you have your pre and post production likely happening in completely different places to where the filming actually occurs. Not always, but it could be. And so again, that geographic spread of the spending, it can be quite large. Now, look, I can almost hear some of the cynical economists in the room saying, oh, aren't most industries like that? They spend some money and then there's some jobs. And yes, that's true to an extent. But look, aside from that geographic spread, there are three other economic dividends that I haven't mentioned, but some of our other speakers have, and I'll just quickly share some stats on those. The first one is tourism. This is separate to your cast and crew spending money when they're out and about. You also have, I think someone called this set detting. So, might all seem like a dream now, but back in the day when we could travel places outside our own state and our own country, research and experience shows that people visit places to visit sets. Look, I bet many of you who've been to New Zealand went to Hobbiton, and that's a prime example of this. Back in the day, the Crocodile Dundee effect was a thing, and in fact that featured as a massive tourism campaign only a couple of years ago. So that really continues on today for some of Australia's best known screen content. And so our estimates put that pre-COVID at around $725 million per year. So hopefully we'll see that return sometime soon. On a related note, we have exports. So screen earnings from overseas are a service export for Australia. And service exports, they can look a bit different in the screen industry. It might be the actual screen content. It could be a format that's sold and licensed. It could be other things that are licensed. Yeah, there's lots of different types of exports. But those export dollars are revenue back to the screen industry, and they can go towards investing in new content, leads to new jobs, etc. So, you know, I think that export side is really important. There's also a cultural side, so I'll come to that in a minute. And then the other benefit, which Kylie touched on, was the skills. It's not just how many jobs are supported, though of course that's important. The type of job is really important too. And the occupations that dominate in screen sectors tend to be quite highly skilled, and they rely on knowledge, the knowledge capital of workers, as opposed to just being more purely sort of physical or manual labour based. And those skills that underpin the screen industry and to be honest, other parts of the creative industries can really help underpin our shift towards being a more services-based economy. And that's because screen production draws upon a really wide range of skills. You know, I couldn't list them all. I'm sure Kylie Pascoe could, but you have, you know, content development, critical thinking, storytelling, more technological-based skills. And all of those things actually form part of heaps of other industries across the economy. So they can, in their own way, support innovations and spillovers in other industries. All right. Next up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the cultural benefits of screen production. Now, sometimes people might think this isn't in the domain of economists, but I always like to say economies are people. It's actually a very people-based study. So I want you to imagine a world where we don't have an Australian screen industry. Our free-to-air and subscription channels only show content from overseas, probably mostly from the US. Our kids grow up mimicking the American accents they hear on TV, and the only Australian voices we hear are on the news. There's no movies or shows reflecting who we are, telling the stories that we've written, we've created as Australians, sharing our history and our culture and ideas. If you're sitting there and thinking like I am, that would be a pretty sad state of affairs, then you, like many other Australians, place a value on our Australian screen industry. Now, the value, that cultural value, can't really be measured that easily. It's what we call a non-market good in economics. So it's not something that can be observed through your typical market transactions. Of course, there is a market value, and that's what we spend on screen content probably every day. But there's that other side, that cultural value, where we want to try and measure what we call the non-use value of Australian screen content. So that's the value that we as Australians gain from locally made film and TV, even if we don't directly purchase or watch that content ourselves. Now, the question, you're asking, how do you measure this? These values can be estimated using an approach known as contingent valuation or CV studies. So this is a method of putting a market value or a dollar value on non-market goods. And so this kind of method has been used often for, I think it started off with more natural resources or environment-based assets, and then people started using it more for cultural assets and institutions as well. And what it is, it's sort of survey-based economic techniques. So we undertook a study back in, I think it was 2016, for Screen Australia, estimating the cultural value of Australian screen content. And what we found in that study was that I'm going to read this out, the average Australian was willing to pay around $28 per year to have the option to watch Australian-made screen content in the future, regardless of whether or not they watch it now. And when you add that up across the Australian adult population, totals $511 million per year. We also surveyed people and asked how much they were willing to pay for others to have the option to watch Australian film and TV. And so to, I guess, make this real, look, I don't have kids, so I don't watch Bluey, but I put value on other people being able to grow up with Bluey, for example. So that's around $20 per year. And that translates to $415 million a year across Australia. So that's that existence value. And finally, we also asked people about their willingness to pay for Australian content out of their taxes, and found that was worth over $1 billion in total. So that's the data. That's how, if we're going to try and put a dollar value on it, that's how much people value having Australian content on our screens. We enjoy them, we learn from them, and as do others around the world. And I think that goes back to that export story. Not only does Australian screen content tell us stories about ourselves, being based here, but they enable us to share our history and culture and our storytelling around the world. I could talk about this more cultural stuff all day, but I might just quickly finish off on some of the opportunities and challenges in the screen sector. I should know, there are some other stats here, I think, all kind of show, in different ways how people, value different aspects of screen content. All those reports are available publicly online as well if you want to have another look. All right, probably no surprise. The screen industry is becoming increasingly globalized, but I think one thing we forget is that it was always global. We have always watched Hollywood films. Actors for many years have started their careers here and gone overseas. I mean, that global nature of this industry it's always been a thing. And there are, I think, a lot of perspectives out there on the rise of subscription services and content quotas, and that's like a much longer discussion for another time. But, this trend towards sort of increasing globalization and changes in how we're consuming content does present opportunities. And then opportunities, we have new players who are spending millions of dollars on Australian-made content. So the major streamers being Netflix, Stan, Disney and Prime, they spent $270 million here in 2020. And I think, remember off the top of my head, around 150 million of that was sort of core Australian programming. So, those productions are at scale, and they can help scale the Australian industry to higher standards and help create that more sustainable industry. So, yeah, as Kylie said, it can be, a bit bitsy, and so it helps have that sustainability. We also need balance. Look, we know that Australians value Australian stories, so it's so important that we're investing in the development of those stories, and that you have young filmmakers and young, script writers who have that support, and that way we can balance those really significant economic dividends of the Hollywood Footloose productions with those, more cultural and economic benefits of sort of that core Australian programming as well. On COVID, I think we were really lucky in Australia. Of course, there was a disruption, but doesn't seem to be to the same extent as elsewhere. And even compare Queensland to other states in Australia, and I live in SA, and it's been pretty similar here. We've been in a really good position, and you've been able to have that, continuous production in states. And I think globally, the screen sector is booming because we are consuming so much content. And to consume content, it needs to be produced somewhere. And Australia is a really attractive destination. We've got those skilled crews, and we've got beautiful locations. It's a really attractive proposition. And sort of in my discussions with agencies, producers, directors, there's a lot of, I feel, positivity. I don't know if Kylie sort of share that as well, but there's parts of it. There's of course there's some risk, but on the whole, we're doing really well. Not how to end. I don't know. I look forward to seeing where this goes, where the statistics are next year, where the industry comes in the coming years. But it does really feel like we're on the cusp of something exciting. So yeah, I'll stop there and look forward. I think we're doing some Q&A now, Louisa. So I'll leave that to you. I'll stop sharing my screen. Work. Yes, cool.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for rounding off the discussion, and like that really broad overview of the economic value of the industry, which we know as economists traverses so much more just than the sort of like market dollar value, picking up on that cultural sort of value element being so important, and also sort of, you know, extending it from that sort of not just the intra-distributional sort of impact of the film industry, like you picked on that whole idea of the spatial spread of investment, but also that intertemporal as well, because we know that these films, they have value today, but they also have value going forward. And I think I picked up there was a scene from The Castle on one of those slides, as well as Crocodile Dundee, which I'm looking forward to reintroducing to the next generation of Australian film goers, which is my own children. So, okay. So, well, thank you to our three presenters. I would like to open the floor to questions. We do have one question that's been posted from Christine Williams, who I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, who was the Queensland WEN chair prior to me, and also the Queensland Chief Scientist. So Christine has asked, do you fear that the advantage we have had over the past 18 months will disappear as the rest of the world opens up more rapidly than Australia? So just throwing it out to the two Kylies, and Elizabeth, you can fight to answer. So I can see Kylie's got her mic open, so she wins first advantage.
I guess what's interesting about the film industry, and again, Kylie Pascoe will bear this out, it's a very long game. You don't wake up today and think, I'll make a film tomorrow. These films are months and years in the planning, and we're not looking to what's going to happen tomorrow. We're looking to 2022 and beyond in Queensland, because we're fairly full until the end of this year, and attracting that Nautilus production as well is a big pipeline for us. We're really also working very hard on local productions. So we had Australian Survivor shoot in Outback Queensland, for example. So I think the next few months are definitely tricky for Australia, but we're very focused on what will happen next year and beyond. And like I said earlier, absolutely looking to maintain that momentum and all the reasons that we think Queensland and Australia is such a great place to film. That's what we keep on promoting, and that's what we've had for decades in this country.
Kylie, so do any of the other panelists, would they like to address that question? Kylie?
I was just thinking about how to best answer that. Look, for us, it's interesting because we've been impacted by a lot of the international productions, just in the sense that the crew shortage is quite tricky. We just don't have enough, as Kylie mentioned earlier. We're not upskilling fast enough, and we just don't have enough crew. And given the borders as well, we can really only work with the crew that are in the state that you happen to be in at the time, because no one's crossing borders at the moment, or very few people will be able to cross borders. So I guess, for us, SJC on almost a daily basis gets more and more requests to make different films. Like we have a morning meeting every morning, like at 9 o'clock every morning, and pretty much every day there's been new contacts been made overnight with international companies that want to work with us and want us to make the films here, for two reasons. One, because we are that COVID safe area, but I think they just see that Australia is such, it has a diverse landscape. But you can, just thinking of the Gold Coast, for example, you can drive 15 minutes in any different direction. You've got a beach, you've got a rainforest, you've got, plains, you've got all sorts of things. You just don't get that. It's very rare to get that anywhere else in the world. So, if we could just fix the crew shortage, Kylie, I'll leave that with you to do that. Thanks. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it's just it's going to maybe change direction a little bit. I think it'll always be here.
So to the two Kylies, like Christine's question was about the rest of the world opens up more rapidly than Australia. Do you have, either of you have any sense of how fast the film industry is opening up globally? So
yeah, I mean, the trades report about LA, Atlanta, New York, UK being back at work. I mean, they didn't grind to a halt completely. I know that at the back end of last year, a lot of production continued to film in the UK in particular, particularly TV series, through really tough restrictions. So when we talk about them opening up again, I think perhaps they're going back to their pre-pandemic levels rather than suddenly taking work away from elsewhere. So yes, we know that productions are happening overseas. I mean, Eastern Europe, all kinds of places where even COVID has been worse than in the past than it has here. So I think that what we're going to see in Australia is we had a boom. We might dip a little bit, but we will definitely not lose out to the rest of the world, because all the reasons that we've said that people come here. Of course, a favourable currency works in our favour as well. The currency exchange, particularly with the US dollar, those reasons. The filmmaking and TV making is a commercial business, and they will go where the incentives are best. Where the crews are best, you know, where they get the value for money. They're not going to stay in the US just because it's easy. They will come here because we have that reputation and we have the incentives, and we, as a country, we aggressively go after those projects and those producers. But at the same time, and I have to keep mentioning it, you know, all of the local content, like Steve Jaggi companies, has to be supported as well, because that's exporting Australia to the world, and that's really critical.
Thank you, Kylie. So I'm just moving down the question list. Cruise One has asked, potentially a commercially sensitive question. So Kylie, would you feel comfortable answering that question, or would you like me to move on?
No, look, I mean, I'm happy to say that this Little Love of Mine production budget was about $3.5 million all up. In terms of how much did we sell it to Netflix, that probably is commercially sensitive, and I can't necessarily go into that. But what I will say is that it's not like a theatrical release where, you know, we got to #2 most watched film in the world. It didn't earn us any more money than if we were the least watched film in the world. But what that does do is then that gets us the next film. And, you know, Netflix have said, you know, Christine Luby directing, we want to look at it. So, you know, that's where the value, I think, of a sale up to Netflix like that is. It's then the continued sales down the line and that reputation that then you gain internationally. Does it have an ROI? Not necessarily, because again, as Kylie was mentioning as well, film is a long game, and it can take years and years and years to, you know, to really generate, I guess not a profit necessarily, but to, you know, to make money out of it can take a long time. It can take several sales, different territories. Yeah, it's not really a get rich quick fast way of living, I've got to say, speaking from experience.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm just sort of unpicking to her question. Did Queensland suffer from productions recently withdrawing from New South Wales with the lockdown there?
Yeah, we have lost 2 productions, both of which have been announced. So Love Island, Australia, was due to film in Port Douglas. There's no issue with Port Douglas or Queensland, as we know, but they did need to bring a fairly substantial number of crew in from New South Wales. And look, Kylie's correct, there's not a lot of people coming in out of the state, but we are getting skilled and critical workers into the state, definitely. But on this occasion, that was going to be too much of a challenge. So Love Island relocated to northern New South Wales, and we wish them every luck with that, because I know how hard it will be to film in a state that's locked down. Australia lost a Netflix feature called Extraction 2 that was due to film in New South Wales and has moved to Eastern Europe. But I have to say, in non-pandemic times, we lose films as well. You know, it's a business model that they will go where the money is. So, you know, there were projects that we lost in Queensland pre-pandemic just because the star was not available. It was a timing issue. It was, the director was not available. So there'll always be reasons why films change location or push back their start date or something like that. Those two are recent examples that were directly because of lockdowns, but we're working really hard to ensure productions, try not to have those kind of delays, and we can support them to remain here.
Okay, thank you. So Stanley H has asked what advice you'd give to TAFE Queensland to ensure that we're supporting the right skills to meet shortages. I did pick up on the accountant shortage, which I will pass to my colleagues in the business school. But if you want to expand.
TAFE runs some fantastic courses, some very brilliant courses, as do a lot of our universities and private institutions, not just in Queensland and the Gold Coast, but all over the state. We will be opening a studio in Cairns in the new year as part of our Far North Queensland strategy, and we'll work quite closely with CQ University up there, but also AFTRS and NIDA. There are many institutions which offer very practical training in all kinds of disciplines. And Kylie, I don't know if you have a view on that in terms of TAFE or other institutions.
Yeah, look, I think something that was really interesting on a couple of the projects that we've just finished filming is when it comes to, interns, attachments, that sort of thing, that we're finding like our gaffers and our grips, they don't need film students. They need, they need electricians, and they need tradespeople that aren't necessarily earmarked for film in that regard. Like costume designers, for example, don't learn film at film school. They don't go to film school. So it's trying to find a pathway for those, I guess, what people wouldn't necessarily think is a film role. They are really crucial to a film crew, and they are also areas that we're, finding shortages. And so if there's a way that, like we were going to shoot another film in Victoria that we ended up shooting in Brisbane just recently, and we had done a deal with it's not a TAFE there, but it was like a TAFE, and they had different they had a flower school, because this was about a florist. They had a flower schools, and they had they did have not costume design, but they had designing, and like they had different disciplines that they were teaching that we could easily apply to our film. And so we were going to bring those students on to, just have even a day on set just to see what happened. But they didn't come from a traditional film school. They came from these other disciplines and I don't think people necessarily think about film as a career when you're becoming an electrician or you're becoming, a carpenter or something like that. So I guess what I would suggest is, if there's a way that you can encourage students in those disciplines to think outside traditional and look at film as being a booming industry, and that we still need all those crew roles. It's I don't know. I hope that sort of makes sense.
Just add, Kylie, that there's a lot of adjacent industries, and SAFC, South Australian Film Corporation, did something really brilliant this year, where they reached down to people who have been stood down, like in the live music industry or in theatre, other allied arts disciplines. And they did some information days and some training about, shifting over from an adjacent industry into, and those skills are very transferable into film and television. And I think, given where live music is in this country, whether it's, behind lighting technicians or roadies or people who traditionally work in those industries, they may want to look at opportunities in film and TV.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting towards the end of the session. I'm sort of going to do chair indulgence, because I've got a couple of questions that might wrap the session up nicely. So first of all, if I could grant you one policy wish to maintain the growth of the Australian film industry, what would it be?
Who's going first?
Well, I was going to say Kylie, but that kind of doesn't really help, does it? Kylie Munnich.
You go first, Kylie Pascoe.
Oh, Kylie Pascoe.
Okay, I guess one of the things we're struggling with at the moment is the recent changes to the producer offset. and there's a very loose. I'm not sure how much people know about the offset, but there's two levels of producer offset. There's one for theatrical. If you're making a theatrical film, you get a 40% producer offset from the state government. From the federal government. If you're making something for broadcast or a streaming service, anything that's like television, you get 30%. So that 10% can be a lot of money when you're looking at, a couple of $1 million. But what's really difficult is it's very loose definition around what is a theatrical release film. And there's been instances just recently where films have released theatrically and Screen Australia or, the federal government has said, we don't think that's a theatrical release. There's no hard and fast definition of what that is. And I think it's very loose, and then it becomes a risk for a filmmaker to rely on 40% and hope that they get 10 screens at a cinema release or 15 or 50 screens, because they might lose that, because the federal government might just go, no, we don't think that that's actually a theatrical release. We think that's actually a television release. Even though you did put it in cinema, we don't think that works. So we'll only give you the 30%. So I would just it'd be great to have some clarity and definition around what is and what isn't a theatrical release for, and it really affects a lot of smaller filmmakers. And again, on that same note, and sorry, I'm going to just jump on my high horse because I'm also a documentary filmmaker. There is the amount for to qualify for the offset now has been increased from $500,000 to $1 million, which for documentary is a lot of money. Most documentaries sit around sort of like 600, 650, around that figure. So that means now that those documentaries will probably never get made, because it will be very hard to get them to budget to $1 million and then get financed at $1 million. And it's also very hard to bring them back down to under 500, where then you can apply for another thing called a producer equity payment, which I think is about 20%. It's still sitting at 20%. So I'm at the moment working on a documentary, and I keep saying to the writers, it can't go over 500,000. It's got to be 495,000 and not a cent more, because otherwise it will never get made. So sorry, they're my two policy changes. Thanks, Louisa.
Oh, no problem, Kylie. Kylie M, would you like to have a crack?
We've been quite vocal in the last year about our support for Australian content, Queensland content, obviously, but Australian content and Australian voices, particularly when it comes to regulation around streaming platforms and a content quota. Obviously, the drama quotas have eased on the free-to-air networks, which is not a great outcome for our industry. So we've really thrown our weight behind, particularly trying to have content quotas on the streamers. I would say as well that my wishes did come true when we really got a big boost from our state government this year in the budget. We've got a $71 million boost to our funding over the next several years. Which is a real vote of confidence in this industry and as part of the economic recovery post-COVID. And one of the things I'm also quite proud of is that we managed to increase our local PDV incentive. So that's our post-digital and visual effects incentive. Several states have these. We used to be 10%, and we've managed to increase to 15%, which is really going to help our post-digital and visual effects houses in Queensland at a time when the federal government has also been seeking to raise the threshold for the federal PDV incentives. So we did a little bit there. So I did get some of my policy wishes, and we were quite pleased about that.
And can I just jump in, sorry, on that point, because we, one of the companies that I work with, the post-production house, was actually just a recipient of that and was able to win a post-deal, I think it's $100,000 worth of post-production in Queensland on a Guy Pearce movie that was shot in Portugal. So it definitely works, and so thank you, Kylie, for doing that as well. 15% was very good. Thank you.
Okay. All right then. So, well, I'm mindful that we've got 1 minute left until time. I'm also conscious that there's an anonymous attendee whose question we haven't been able to address. If they wish to email me directly, if you type in Louisa Coglan into Google, you'll find me. There's only one of me in the world, and I'll field your question appropriately to one of the speakers. thank you all for your contributions. It's been an absolutely fabulous session. You have made me feel that my binge watching has total economic value. I can do that now, guilt-free. I would also like to thank the participants who are here, and also the people who will watch this as a recording. For those of you who are WEN members and ESA members, remember that the webpage has updates of all forthcoming events. But for now, don't want to steal anybody's thunder. It's been a great, fabulous session. So I'd just like to close the session by really congratulating our speakers. So I'll give you a little round of applause from behalf of everybody. Thank you so much.